Good to have each of you here this morning. The second Sunday theme sermon has turned into the fourth Sunday theme for this month, but our meeting came on the second, so here we are. But anyway, we're glad that you're here and hope this will be an interesting lesson this morning as we talk about whether the flood was worldwide or not. And there's a lot out there about that, a lot of interesting theories on why would you even question whether it is or not. But that's certainly something that has taken place in a lot of people's mind, thinking that the flood is more localized, or that it only affected the people in the Mesopotamian region, and that was the extent of that. And so this morning I want us to talk about, what does the text actually say? What's it talk about? And then, of course, look at some evidences that are around for there being a worldwide flood. So we could just keep it short, as Ryan said this morning, just the answer is yes, and then call it good. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper than that this morning in our study. The fact is, in Genesis chapter 6 through 9, the Bible teaches us there was a great catastrophic flood. In chapter 6, God announces that there's going to be a great flood in which all of mankind and all of the animals on the entire earth are going to be wiped out. He gave the reason for this judgment in saying that it was the sinful hearts and the wicked behavior of mankind. So think about the size of the flood that we're talking about. Genesis chapter 6 tells us that it's going to be judgment. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Verse 7, the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I made them. Verse 12, God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. Verse 13, God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Verse 17, for behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that's on the earth shall die. So there's a lot in chapter 6 that when you read through that, makes you wonder how you could read it any other way. Chapter 7, we read about the purpose of the ark, this huge barge-like boat to keep Noah and his family and the animals alive on the face of the earth. That's what verses 1 through 3 are talking about in chapter 7. That's the end of verse 3, to keep alive on the face of the earth. And so, you think about this whole purpose, if the flood that we read about in Genesis is only a local flood or somewhat small compared to, the earth, then, building an ark that size just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Seems very unnecessary. Surely they would be able to go somewhere or do something different. God could have easily communicated to Noah to take his family, take the animals, get out of there, go to a certain spot that would not be affected by this flood. I mean, after all, that's what happens with Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Lot takes his family and flees, gets away from the city, goes to the mountain, and while Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. I mean, I'm not the fastest person, probably realize that, but I could probably go a ways in 120 years, right? Maybe I wouldn't need that much time, or I wouldn't have that much time. But, you could travel a little ways over that amount of time that we're talking about. And yet that's not what God instructs Noah to do. Starting around verse 18 of Genesis chapter 7, it says that the waters prevailed more and more upon the earth. Some translations say greatly increased on the earth. The ark moved about on the surface of the water. And then it says, all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered in verse 19. And he goes on to say that in all whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. Sure sounds like a worldwide flood. All right, when you get over to chapter 9, verses 12 through 15, there was going to be a rainbow given as a sign. Thank you, Ethan, for leading that song. A rainbow that was going to be a sign that there would never be a flood like there was before. Nothing that was going to be a worldwide flood like what has happened. And if it's only local or smaller, then that kind of loses any kind of bite that it has, because there's been a lot of terrible floods over the years, over history, of course. But this was going to be something different. It was not going to be anything like what had occurred in Noah's day. That's why the rainbow covenant is so special there. And there's nothing been like that since. As terrible as floods are and as much damage as occurs, nothing close to a worldwide flood has taken place. It is interesting when you read some that other people have said about some of these things, what the consensus is by many. There's a lot of people think that there's not really any kind of miracle involved in the flood that takes place here. People often view it as just kind of natural means, but I would say that's a little bit short-sighted in the thinking of things. Let's look at Psalm chapter 104. Psalm chapter 104. And let's read verses 5 through 9. It says, "He established the earth upon its foundations, so that it will not totter forever and ever." Most translations say something about it won't move. "You did cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters were standing above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the sound of thy thunder they hurried away. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place which you did establish for them. You did set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth." Now there's some thoughts on, is this talking about the flood or is it talking about creation? It seems like it has more of a creation sort of feel to it. But, when you think about God establishing boundaries, when you see him setting these things into motion, of course, the earth being covered with water, and then there's boundaries that are set up. The mountains rise, the valleys sink, and there's a boundary that the waters would not pass over. And so there's a lot of people that believe, well, that means it can't be a worldwide flood because God has set boundaries. But that's also under the thinking that this flood in Genesis 6 is just under a normal means or a normal situation. But it's far from normal. This whole thing is far from normal, right? When you think about the whole instruction by God and what's taking place. But if you look in Genesis chapter 7, when the flood is getting ready to start, and when the ark has been built, when Noah and the animals and everything are on the ark, verse 11 of chapter 7, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened." So it didn't just happen. This wasn't, naturally, it just something occurred. God made these things take place. This was clearly a miraculous thing. All of a sudden, the boundaries God set didn't just give way because, I don't know why. God had set boundaries. Those things were released. Those things were opened up to accomplish his purpose there. Of course, a miracle, something miraculous, is something outside of the range of normal, outside of the range of what would just happen in nature. If you look in chapter 8 in verse 2, the opposite is said concerning when these things are starting to be over. It says, "The fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained." God has a hand in all of this. This isn't natural. This isn't just, oh, it rained really hard and that's that. Nor was it, it just stopped. Wonder why that happened. It was restrained. It was restricted. It was closed. And so these things are not a natural means of things. God caused these things to be established. So yes, boundaries have been set. God does the miraculous, and then the boundaries, of course, are reestablished there. So there's a lot in all of these passages that show us, why would anybody think that it's anything other than a worldwide flood? I don't know how you can read through this and say, it's probably localized. It's probably smaller, just covered a certain region. You have to have some kind of ulterior motive, some other kind of thinking on things, or, as is often popular in recent years, trying to put whatever you believe with science and try to juggle that around to make it fit with what you believe that the scriptures might be telling. And that's often what the case is. People who want to argue for an old earth, one that is billions of years old, this is what they try to do to kind of make it fit with the whole timeline of geology and the scientific theories with evolution and all that. They try to make it all fit by saying, well, maybe it was local, and so we're gonna try to put that together to make it work. But the fact is, you don't just read through this and say, it's probably local. You don't come up with that. All right, let's talk about some arguments from the Bible. That's not just the text we've just been looking at. Moses, of course, being an inspired author, means to convey what he does about this flood and the enormity of that. He's not trying to be deceptive. He's not trying to deceive anybody in what he's saying. But also think about that Jesus believed in the global proportions of this flood that we're talking about. If you look over in Matthew chapter 24, which is split between talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and then also talking about when the ultimate judgment is going to be. But in Matthew 24, when we get to the part of where he's talking about when's this time going to be that it's going to be the end of this age, the end of all, and all of these things, Jesus, of course, compares it to the flood. Look in verse 37. The coming of the Son of Man shall be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man. So Jesus compares the conditions surrounding the second coming to the flood and its global proportions. And I think it's a pretty fair thing to ask. Is Jesus' return going to be localized? Is Jesus' return and ultimate judgment going to be just a local thing? Can you escape that judgment by doing something else or going somewhere else? It would be a ridiculous comparison, right? Oh, I just need to go where the judgment's not. No, he's making this comparison because it's the seriousness of what we're talking about, the global judgment. That's why he's going to go on to say, be ready. We don't know the time or the hour, the day or the hour. Be ready, be prepared. We don't know. They weren't prepared when the earth was flooded and wiped out. And the coming of the Son of Man is going to be just like that, he says. So unless you're willing to say that Jesus' return is just going to be a local event, really, this passage does a lot in that way of thinking, of making us understand this is just as much as the second coming is going to be. That's just as much the proportion of the flood. Otherwise, that comparison doesn't make any sense at all. And I would say the same thing for what Peter writes in 2 Peter chapter 3. Whenever 2 Peter chapter 3, when Peter is writing about, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continued just as it was from the beginning of creation. That's verse 4. It says that they maintain this. It escapes their notice that by the word of God, the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. And so he makes this comparison about what happened. There was creation, there was all of this, and then the earth was destroyed with water. But what's the point of him even bringing that up? Verse 7, the present heavens and earth by his word are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. Well, there it is again, the judgment, in the same way that the world was destroyed with water, the world is going to be destroyed again with fire this time. That's the judgment picture that's given. That's the only way that it makes a good comparison, is by thinking about the fact that the earth and its works are going to be burned up. It's all going to be destroyed. If you try to make it a local comparison, that doesn't make any sense at all. That doesn't have the gist of what's being talked about. Why is it that he's going to go on to say, since all these things, verse 11, are to be destroyed, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? It has no effect if you can get away from that. If the fire reserved for judgment is something you can escape from, there's no reason. It would be a terrible comparison to make a local flood, have this kind of situation. So anyway, I think those are really valid points to consider in talking about this subject, understanding what does Jesus think about it, what does Peter think about it in what they're saying. So the arguments from the Bible are very powerful in thinking about this topic. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at some geological evidence for the flood in talking about that now. Of course, evolutionary scientists, accept the theory that, in all of the geologic column, we see these fossils contained, and, they believe that those things happened over long periods of time. And so that's, of course, what they would have you to believe. But when you talk about the flood, the flood, shows that, these things happened very quickly. These things came down very fast. The rock layers are laid down quickly in a short period of time. And that's why you have all of this death that is seen that occurred during the flood. That's not something that happened over long periods of time. And so some of the things that go along in thinking about some of this, you think about stratified rock, the different layers of rock. Sedimentary rock happens from moving water that's hardened into rock, covers 75% of the Earth's surface. And that's where 95% of the fossils are. They're found in that sedimentary rock. Just the fact that so much of the Earth is covered by that and composed of sediment, that's settled out of water, is pretty strong evidence for a worldwide flood. The fact that so much of our Earth is covered with that stratified rock is a good piece of evidence. Boulders are pieces of rock that's been rounded and worn by being tumbled around in moving water, such as the result of a river or flood waters. And the very fact that there are so many boulders throughout the geologic column, indicates that there was a lot of powerful water that did these things. And the fact that there are so many that are around fits in quite well with the evidence for a worldwide flood. A lot of boulders are deposited in sediment in all different areas. Would have occurred with strong action of rising waters. And it's really hard to explain that any other way with all the different layers of in the geologic column. If that just occurred over a great period of billions of years, it wouldn't be just all over the place like that. It would take a flood of gigantic proportion. Something called conformities as opposed to non-conformities. Conformities are sharp, clean dividing lines, and they show the layers between the rock. Conformity is where there's not any kind of erosion between the layers. There's not any kind of erosion. That's a good word. Between the layers, and so they are conforming to one another, and that's evidence of a rapid buildup in the sediment, and that's again all over the world, and is a good evidence for a worldwide flood. There are nonconformities in the earth that is evidenced by there being erosion between the layers, but they don't extend all around the earth. They are limited in where they are. And you would think if evolution were true, you would find mostly nonconformities, mostly a layer and then being worn before there was another layer on top of that, because as the evolutionary view is, a lot of time happened between all of these layers, and they would have been put down over extended amounts of time. Whereas it is mostly conformities with not the erosion between the layers. So that's pretty interesting as well. Just the very fact that there are the inclusion of fossils is a pretty good evidence. We might often think about, does every tree, does every animal that dies become a fossil? Is Rover going to be a fossil? Probably not. No, it doesn't happen that way, right? What it takes to become a fossil, if you have great hope for your life, what does it take to become a fossil? Well, it takes rapid burial under sediment is required. That's what's going to be necessary for something to be fossilized. If something is dead and it's not rapidly buried, what's going to happen? It's what we're mostly used to. It rots away. It gets, it doesn't fossilize. It just rots away. It becomes, nothing. It takes something special for there to be a fossil. It takes a rapid burial under sediment. So the very fact that we have these fossils included in all of this stratified rock is pretty amazing. Large dinosaur fossils. They would need a massive amount of sediment that's quickly covered them up in order for that to be the case. And that's a clear evidence of a rapid buildup from a catastrophic water action that would have taken place. If that didn't happen, you would just have decomposed dinosaurs, and we wouldn't see anything like that in our day and time. But that's not the case. There's so many fossils. The distortion of the sediments is another interesting thing. Maybe you can see that it's a Range Rover or Land Cruiser or something like that that's on the screen up there at the bottom. So that shows you how big and massive that picture really is. Well, the picture itself isn't, but what it's taken a picture of is. But the fact that you can find rock layers that are smoothly bent like that, or folded together without cracking or breaking is pretty amazing. Because when you think about trying to bend rock, what comes to your mind? Nothing good. That would be it's not going to happen, right? You try to bend rock, you're either going to be not strong enough or it's going to break. It's not going to bend. You would need to think about like modeling clay. You get a layer of modeling clay, you put another layer on top of that. You can bend it, you can fold it, do whatever you want, as long as it stays pliable. Otherwise, it's going to crack, it's going to break, it's not going to fold properly. So the only way, how can a rock layer then be smoothly bent or folded? It's only going to be because it's soft and pliable, and it's going to happen at the same time. All those things are going to be able to be bent and folded at the same time. Otherwise, it's going to break. It's not going to work. So if the stratified rock is built up over great periods of millions of years, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not possibly going to fold and bend like that. The layers between them, it's going to crack. It's going to break. And it's going to shift over time to where that's just not possible. So there's no way to get smooth folds like that from already hardened rock. And I think that's a pretty valuable piece of information to think about in looking at the evidence of that. How do you fold solid rock? How do you bend it? It's just not going to happen. But a worldwide flood, all that sediment coming down, all that layers being built on top of each other, all that disturbance and catastrophe going on could definitely be why that is, of course. All right, let's move on to some paleontology, or the paleontological evidence. That's a big word, for the flood. There's a lot of things about fossils that are pretty intriguing. A lot of things that are hard to know exactly, but just the sheer number of fossils, and I mentioned that just a while ago. But the fact that there are just so many fossils, shows us that there had to be a rapid burial. There had to be a quick buildup of the sediment in order for there to be fossils. Again, if it's just things that have died over periods of time, it's not going to fossilize. There has to be a quick buildup of these things. And the stratified rock is full of fossils. And it fits a lot better to think and understand that there was a global flood, and that's the reason why that is, than to somehow try to assume that it's the result of millions of years of slow evolution. That would not cause all of that. The size of the fossils. There's entire dinosaurs, huge elephants, mammoths, whatever, that are found in rock layers. It had to be something big, something fast and large in order to bury them that quickly. These aren't just small microscopic things we're talking about. These are huge things. A flood coming on quickly, all that sediment building up. That's how that would have taken place. And large fossils are good evidence to show us that the flood was worldwide. What we will call polystrate fossils. That's a fancy way of saying multiple layers. The stratuses, the different layers that there were, but they're fossils that go to different layers. They're not just stuck in one specific layer. A tree trunk like what's on the screen there, extending straight up through several layers of rock. I mean, that doesn't just happen over millions of years and the rock builds up around the tree. What would happen to the tree? What we've just been talking about. It's going to rot. It's going to disintegrate. We've had that happen just in our own lifetimes. If you've had a tree die or something, it doesn't just get better. It doesn't fossilize on your property. That doesn't happen at all. It rots out and it falls apart. It would take all of these layers quickly coming down and around it in order for a tree to be fossilized like that, extending through several layers of rock. It would have had to have been quick. Otherwise, it's just going to be rotted. And there's no way a dead tree is going to remain there for millions of years while the rock somehow builds up around it. It just doesn't make any sense. The only way that a tree is going to exist through multiple layers is through this process we're talking about, and through this flood. It's not just going to happen like that. So I think that's very interesting to think about as well, because we can relate to that just with what we know of our own. If you have poor tree skills like some of us do, that's a little bit more relatable. This last one really isn't in the paleontology category, but I'm going to just throw it in there anyway. And just thinking about some of the flood stories that are around. A lot of cultures around the world have traditional folklore stories about some sort of worldwide flood that took place in ancient times. A lot of the traditions only have a few people that escaped from it, and I know it's not absolute proof or anything, but it is interesting that there are a lot of traditions of a great flood, that there must have been some event that took place that started all of that. Noah and his descendants would have certainly been talking about the story of the flood to their successive generations. How could you not? Mom and Dad, why are there nobody else over here except for us? Well, I got a story for you. They'd be talking about that, for a long period of time. And even though a lot of these other flood stories are greatly distorted, still that's pretty good evidence that there was something of a great worldwide flood that took place. The picture on your screen is the Gilgamesh epic that is pictured, the Babylonian account of the flood. They say it's like around 4,000 years ago that's dated to, but this was found back in the 1850s. A little archaeology thrown in there for the side. But, pretty interesting to think about all of those things coming out. Wrapping it up this morning, in biblical terms, we are required to have faith. Faith is believing what God has revealed. And when you read about Noah in Hebrews chapter 11 and in verse 7, it says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. God told Noah to prepare an ark. What did he do? He believed God. He believed God and obeyed God, even though he really didn't have any evidence. He didn't say, show me the flood and then I'll build one. He believed God and about things not yet seen. He had never seen this before. He didn't really know what to expect other than what God had said to him. But he had faith and constructed the ark for the saving of his household. God asks us to believe what he has revealed. But let me be clear about this. He doesn't ask us to believe and just have blind faith. He doesn't say, I want you to believe this. It doesn't make any sense at all, but I want you to believe this. That's not what he's asking. Faith is never like that. It's not blind. Our faith is not. And he doesn't ask us for a blind leap of faith. We have a lot of evidence. It's just what we do with that is often the issue. Do we have the evidence? Do we look at it and believe it? Or do we say, well, let's believe what a lot of scientists say, or let's just ignore what God says in favor of, what I can see with what I want to have happen. And people don't often appreciate that. People are sometimes laughing at the idea of a 6-day literal creation. They don't expect that we should be believing in a Genesis flood. But you know what? They probably laughed at Noah too, right? They certainly did. They didn't appreciate what he was doing. He was the righteous guy. They weren't. And they didn't appreciate what he was doing as well. Is it too much to ask that we have some faith and encouragement and courage like Noah had to believe that, have the kind of faith that he had, and continue to believe what God has revealed in his word? Again, he's not asking us to believe blindly. There's plenty of evidence out there if we will, in fact, look at it. It is there. But remember, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's not blind. It's the evidence of things not seen. We weren't there for the flood, but there's a lot of evidence. We weren't there to actually see it, but we can look around and see the evidence of that even in our own day and time. So let's have the kind of faith and courage that Noah had to believe God and understand the seriousness of his word. Jesus believed it. Peter believed it. What do we think about them? This morning, if your life is not right with the Lord, we hope you'll change that this very day. We encourage you to repent of your sins, confess your faith in Jesus as the Son of God, be baptized in water for the forgiveness of your sins. The Lord wants us to be saved. There's going to be a judgment. The flood is an example that's used multiple times in the scriptures, as we've talked about this morning, to show us that God is serious about that. He's serious about his love, so much so that he sent Jesus to die on the cross. But there's going to be a time when it's too late. We would encourage you this morning to get your life right with the Lord. If we can help in any way, please let it be known by coming forward. He's going to stand and sing. Almost